Today we're going to be talking about business value. Why do business coaches care about valuation?
It links what the coaches working with the leadership team, initiatives, goals, to the outcome that I would say is the most important outcome for the owner is how are we improving my value?
At the core of all this, there's this question of how does what we're working on right now impact the value of the business long term? And that's something that's not being talked about regularly.
You commit to getting buy-in from your team and quit holding back on your fear of being transparent, you will see significant impact in performance.
Well, Dad, welcome. First episode of the McFarland Method. Today we're going to be talking about business value. Let's start with just a simple question. Why do business coaches care about valuation?
Why do business coaches care about valuation is because it links what the coaches working with the leadership team, initiatives, goals, to the outcome that I would say is the most important outcome for the owner is how are we improving my value? So it creates a linkage between those two.
And so the linkage is between the coach and the thing the coach or the thing the owner cares about.
Yeah,
or
when the coach is facilitating meetings with the leadership team, they're working on improvements to the organization, and what are those improvements ultimately manifesting into? Business value. So the more effective the coach is in getting the improvements implemented, the bigger the impact on the business value. So it's a real opportunity for the coach to show the owner the linkage between the role the coach plays and the impact they have on the team, which then turns into the impact on the business value. So it creates a link between those two.
So with that link, let's define then how is the value determined? Because it seems like the coach is going to really care about the metric that's going to be tracking over time.
Yeah, that's another great question. Everybody's wondering, how do you value a business? Well, small businesses that are being sold ultimately are valued generally based on their profitability and their ability. The higher the profitability, potentially the more value. And then there's the impact of what they call predictability. So a formula for valuation would be profits times a multiplier. And that multiplier is influenced positively by predictability or negatively by, unpredictability, a lot of instability. So the more predictable the profits are, the higher the value is going to be, the bigger the multiplier is going to be.
So you've got earnings or profitability multiplied by, or that has a multiple, which is determined primarily based on the stability or the predictability of the earnings into the future. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So the earnings are usually characterized as EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. That's a lot of accounting terms, but by and large is how profitable is the business. And then they value it based on a multiple of those profits. How likely are those profits to be sustained in the future? So, for example, a publicly traded company on the Standard & Poor's 500 has what they call a price earnings ratio, which is a multiple of its earnings of about 22, 23. So there's so much faith in the predictability of the earnings that people are willing to pay 22 times those earnings to buy that stock. So in a small business, if you can get 4 times earnings, that usually represents a high degree of variability, and you're working on trying to even that variability out. And a coach does that through facilitation of improvements. And if they are successful, then they'll increase the multiplier from 4 to 5 to 6 to 8 or some other number.
Okay. So the coach can look at where the business is right now and get an idea of that multiplier just based on the stability and predictability of revenue over time. You talked about the improvements that a coach might make or might try to influence. Let's just take a second and talk about that. What drives predictability?
Well, if there are processes in place that are followed regarding the most common activities, then you can predict the outcome based on what happened in the past using the data. So a coach can look at how operational discipline, how much operational discipline exists in the business in standard operating procedures, which tends to be one of the biggest initiatives that I've seen in my experience that coaches are implementing towards with the leadership team. So getting those standard operating procedures in place and then have those operating procedures followed by the people that are playing the roles that are closest to the problem. And so that's the first.
Okay. So that's the first piece is predictable operating systems. What are the other components?
Then you have the right people that who will understand their responsibility in the delivery of the experience or the service for the client or the product, that are caring enough about the outcome that they would be looking for ways to please the client or make the client's experience that much more enjoyable. So getting the right people playing roles that are key to the client experience. So if you have a organization where you're delivering a service, then the people that are delivering that service, if they're meeting the expectations of the client routinely, then you have your people aspect of the business right. So operating systems run by people tend to create a higher degree of predictability. And the third factor then would be basically applying technology or systems that help allow for greater speed or more complexity without interrupting the service. So application of technology, people running the system, and then the adhering to the operating systems. Those would be three that create predictable income. Others might be the nature of your revenue. If it's project-based versus reoccurring, like subscription, you hear about software as a service, SaaS, and they have higher value because their relationship with the client is subscription, and that creates predictability in the revenue. So you got revenue predictability, and then you got experience predictability. And if you can do those two things pretty well, then you have high probability of increasing your multiplier.
Okay, so let's recap that really quick. So we have predictable operating systems. You got to start there. Then you can layer on technology to make those systems work faster, to get more throughput. You've got customer satisfaction driven by having the right people on the team that care about the mission. And you've got then predictability of revenue based on the kind of work that you're doing and how you bill your clients. Do I have that right so far?
Yes, you got it right there.
So how does, I think then the challenge question is, you didn't talk about something that I know coaches spend a lot of time doing, which is like getting clarity of vision for leadership teams. They're doing these quarterly these quarterly strategy meetings, annual meetings. Where does the value of the vision alignment come into this predictability matrix?
Well, that's a great point, Alex, is that to arrive at those various outcomes, the operating systems, standard operating procedures, or having the right people doing the right thing, and then applying technology and looking at the nature of your agreement with your clients, that all requires some thinking at a leadership level. And you arrive at those outcomes by determining where are we now and how much work would we have to do in order for us to change any one of those four variables. So if we want to improve our operating processes, we have to start documenting what's going on. That takes vision from the leadership team as to what systems should we be documenting. And the coach would be navigating all of the activities that go on in a business and providing some insight into which one of those operating systems should be touched first. And that all becomes from vision as to where are we going, where are we now, and what about where we are now makes us feel unsafe. And that's where the facilitation helps, is clarifying that in the vision. And that would be where the decisions are made as to what should we be prioritizing in the form of goals or 90-day rocks or OKRs or whatever the the term that's being used by the coach.
Okay, so the coach is starting with the vision for the company. They're talking about, then they're kind of working with the team to identify where they feel like least safe relative to that goal. Is that something that you've seen traditionally? I can't imagine guys are advertising that's going to be a step of their process, but you've been doing this a while.
Yeah. They don't say safe, but when there's mistakes that are chronically occurring and causing pain, what they're really looking for is, I want relief from the pain. And then ultimately they come up with a way to maybe relieve that pain that they can then rely on and hand it off to somebody, which is then, I want a safe handoff of this responsibility. So I feel the pain.
Let me jump in.
Yeah.
So you're saying that a coach then is going to say, all right, here's our vision, or here's the vision that I'm hearing from you. They're going to identify, where do we feel like we're encountering recurring patterns of frustration. And then we put in systems to address that. The people are systems. Do I have that kind of right? And that all of this is happening with the objective of increasing the valuation of the business over time, whether that's explicit or implicit, just in the motivations of the people in the room.
Great point. I'm not sure that everybody's aware of what the purpose is. There's identification of key numbers, which might be revenue or gross profit or net profit. I've rarely ever experienced the linkage of any of those outcomes to how does that impact the business value? And I think that's the opportunity, is to create that link.
Okay. So there's a missing link in terms of just awareness of how do these decisions, how do these investments, how are they going to impact the business value, which at the end of the day, everybody really cares about, because I guess with more predictable revenue, you have more predictable cash flow to cover your operating expenses, cover payroll, and everybody wants to make sure they get paid. So at the core of all this is this question of, or at the core of all this, there's this question of how does what we're working on right now impact the value of the business long term? And that's something that's not being talked about regularly.
I see the linkage as an advisor who has been involved in these management planning meetings, and as an advisor who has designed exit outcomes, and can see the link very clearly as to how all these improvements increase predictability, which directly impact the multiplier that's applied to the earnings. So improving predictability improves the multiplier, increases the number of the multiplier, which increases the business value.
So this is something that we didn't talk about earlier, but I think that it's probably an important point, is that you've got kind of two levers to pull in terms of improving business value or increasing business value. You've got increase earnings and you've got increase the multiple. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yes. If you increase the earnings, then, and there's no corresponding increase in the multiplier, then you've increased the business value. So for example, if you went from $1 million of earnings to $1.25 million of earnings, and the multiplier of those earnings that was a fair prediction of your predictability and what the market would suggest is fair, is 4. Let's say your multiplier is 4, which that's usually the most common multiplier we see for owner-led small businesses that aren't building to scale. So 4 times $1 million is $4 million. If you improve it to $1.25 million, 4 times $1.25 million is $5 million. So you've increased your business value by $1 million, which is really quite significant. So then if we look at the multiplier and say, what can we do to move the multiplier up, which makes the earnings safer and probably makes it less stressful for the owner and the leadership team, because we're relying on systems run by people who care, leveraging technology, and maybe pursuing a different mix of business that's more predictable, that would favorably influence the multiplier. Let's say we move the multiplier from 4 to 5, and we don't change the earnings. So we got $1 million of earnings times 5, we got $5 million in value. So we can increase the value by going for the earnings only, that we're probably having a lot of stress because it's taking hero effort to get done, or we can work on the business and make it more operationally sound, safer, and increase the multiplier without worrying about the earnings so much and get the same place. So most businesses, when they sell, they're really the buyers looking at the predictability of the earnings, and that's where the value tends to have the biggest impact. Is how do I increase the value of my business? It's by increasing the predictability.
So we talk about this all the time, right? Like, this predictability is something that I really care about. It's something that you've seen grow in importance over time. I'm curious, one of the things that people say is like least predictable is the people. And you talked about people caring. So how does the people and their buy-in fit into this equation?
Well, that's the hardest part for most business owners, because they're somewhat reluctant to enter into interpersonal relationships with their team and understand what their team wants. And a coach standing between an owner and a senior leader and helping them get to know each other better and understand what each other's motivations are has a favorable effect on buy-in. For example, there's a psychological construct called reciprocity, which is, to the extent that I care about your well-being and happiness, and I express that through my interest in you, you are going to have a reciprocal effect and care about my well-being and happiness. So if an owner were to go to their senior leaders and ask them some questions about their relationship with the company and what is it that's going on in their life that the company might be able to help them with, or why are they here, things that would reveal to the owner what the person's motivation is, that has a very substantial impact on buy-in.
Okay, so let's take a pause there. So what is buy-in? Just simply put again, buy-in is how somebody like views the goals of the company as being aligned with their own individual goals.
Yes.
How well aligned that is.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. That's it. That's that. They call that goal alignment. So you're exactly right.
So let's go back then to predictability and talk about just like, okay, clarity of vision, for example. How does buy-in affect that lever for from a coach's perspective, from an owner's perspective?
Ideally, the owner would go to the key people before he was selling them on his vision and understand what it is they wanted in their relationship with the company to secure that buy-in. And then would take the opportunity to share the vision that he or she has for the business and get buy-in on that outcome based on the linkage between what he wants and what the key employees said they wanted, the senior leaders said they wanted. And then be able to answer 4 key questions. 1, where are we going? 2,
Yep. I apologize. Let's save that for another episode. So we've got basically clarity of vision and alignment that equals buy-in is going to ensure for the owner that the team sticks around through a transition, which is a really key question that any buyer is going to be digging around in. Is that
probably the most nerve-wracking period in the owner's life, is that time when they're decided they want to sell and all they need to tell their team what their intentions are.
Okay. So then second, you've got predictable operating systems. How does buy-in impact your operating systems?
Well, the people who care about not seeing mistakes are the ones who potentially go out of their way to resolve mistakes or see opportunities to prevent mistakes in the future and proactively address them, make recommendations for alternative ways of doing things. So being bought in.
So I got to believe then that that's tied in directly to the idea of customer satisfaction, that third component.
Yes, the more bought in you are on why the organization exists and how it's helping its customers, then that would be a representation of buy-in.
Okay. So buy-in is impacting all of these drivers of predictability, which thereby are increasing or decreasing the multiple, thereby increasing or decreasing the business value. That makes sense. So is it fair to say then that companies that have buy-in and are engaged in this process are more profitable, more competitive? Has that been your experience?
Yes, all the research I've done has suggested that the higher the level of buy-in that the team has on the vision, the more likely the organization is to be in the top quartile of profitability and other key performance metrics for their industry.
Okay. So this is your missing link then that people aren't talking about when it comes to business value is you've got basically the idea of we should be focusing on not just increasing earnings, but increasing our multiple and considering how do our people, our key employees and the folks that are out there doing the work every day, how bought in are they to the vision of the company and so which is a question then of alignment. Yeah, that all makes sense. So essentially you have this invisible thing that's affecting the value of a tangible, construction business or field services business. So I get that right?
Yes. Yeah. If you get buy-in and you're operating with systems and technology and have reoccurring revenue relationships or predictable repeat customers, you're going to have a bigger multiple.
Okay. All right, great. Well, that seems like a good place for us to pause for today. Our goal is to just have very digestible, short pieces of conversation that help coaches to be able to be more effective at pulling the levers on behalf of their clients or guiding their clients on those pulling those levers. So we're going to be talking more about how does buy-in work, how does the systems work, kind of when do you prioritize different things. But we're going to start with human, kind of the human element as the first series of episodes. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Before we go into the Q&A, do you have any closing thoughts or anything that you'd want to share?
If you commit to getting buy-in from your team and quit holding back on your fear of being transparent, you will see significant impact in performance. So I would encourage people to be transparent and share where you want what's going on with you.
Perfect. All right, Hannah, that seems like a good place to hit pause. Do we have any questions today? I know we seeded a couple questions.
Yeah, we've got 2 questions. So the first question we've got is we worry that predictability can maybe be subjective. So what advice would you give to coaches or business owners to help them determine what they should consider good when talking about predictable outcomes?
Well, it's been my experience that this is a place where coaches have a lot of professional expertise, and that they're coming from business backgrounds, and they're providing guidance to their owners on scorecards. So if an organization is managing its business activities through a scorecard, and they are able to understand what the difference is between good and bad, then they're working their way towards predictability. So
Looks like we lost Byron. You can't hear him, can you, Alex?
No, I can't hear him. So let me take a swing at that while maybe he reconnects. Yeah. So it was a question of like predictability can be subjective.
Yeah. How do you ensure that it doesn't just feel good for you, but it is actually true and you do have good predictability?
Well, one of the things that we do, right? We don't have 30 years of experience, and just stay on, Hannah. Yeah, don't jump back and forth. It's not helping. The one of the things we do is just measure things, right? So if you can't collect data on it, chances are it's probably not predictable, right? Like I think that there is a certain amount of just measurement and applying some objectivity to some of these questions that one can do, and then also that probably bolsters a story that you can tell to a potential buyer about how predictable the company is. Dad, we lost you in somewhere in that answer. So I think let's move on to the next one, and we can circle back on that topic next time.
Yeah.
Or in the future.
Great. So the last question that we have is, if an owner is, sees the value in getting buy-in, but maybe traditionally they haven't had any of those kind of conversations with their key employees or leadership team, how would you go about framing up that first initial conversation to talk about buy-in?
Yeah, what I would do is ask myself questions. What do I know about this person's, what are their goals? Do I know anything about their goals? Do I know anything about their family situation, where they might be struggling with family or health or some other area, and just really try to assess where they're at, and then look at their past experience and ask, what does their past experience inform me about how they might see the world? So if they come from a fairly simple background where no one in their family's ever owned a business before, you telling them how a business actually impacts you as an owner would be a real good move, to let them know that, owning a business is hard emotionally, physically. It's tough on your health. It makes you stay up at night worrying about things. And that kind of transparency creates empathy. And in many ways, that's considered a gift, just being honest with people. And that would be a demonstration of reciprocity. So I would start there. What do I know?
This is ironic because I'm at a truck stop in East Texas, and I've got better internet than Dad today. Okay, so transparency is a big motivator for the for that. Okay, great. Well, I think we did a great job today. First episode down. Let's wrap it there. 27 minutes in.
Great.